South Sudan is the world's newest nation, but it faces an age-old problem: massive corruption. The country's leaders and warlords are battling over South Sudan's wealth, while millions of its people are caught in the crossfire. George Clooney and a human rights activist named John Prendergast are leading an effort to stop it. And this week, we talk with them.
The president and the ousted vice president are engaged in massive corruption that leads to violence and rape and starvation. And that, I think, is a pretty amazing thing to be able to come forward with.
2 years ago, Clooney and Prendergast put together an investigative team trying to unravel how South Sudan's leaders are looting its wealth. To understand what's going on, you need to know the players. The country's president, Salva Kiir.
Some of these ministers have bought apartments. They have bought very beautiful houses, villas. They are hiding it in Kenya.
You know this.
And they have refused to reveal.
Beautiful houses, hidden wealth. He should know. President Kiir's official salary is $60,000 a year, but among the Kiir family getaways is this elegant villa in Lavington, an upscale community in Nairobi, Kenya.
And the deposed vice president, Riek Machar, who Kiir drove from office.
Yet Machar is no innocent victim. He's been playing the same dirty financial game. Machar tried to sell off the country's oil to a Russian arms dealer in return for deadly weapons, while his family lives in different homes outside South Sudan, far from the war zone.
The two of them have spent the last few years stealing money from their own people, using that money to fund militias to kill one another to try to seize power, and with that power be able to procure contracts, military contracts, for instance, oil contracts, that they could then steal more money. The reality is, every time we looked at it, you'll say, well, is this just ethnic, or is this in some way religious, or what is the argument here? And the reality is, it is all about corruption, and it's all about money.
They're stealing lots of money, as much as $4 billion.
Most of it's oil revenue, military contracts, that kind of thing. They're stealing in the same way that we've seen it over the years, and in the same way you would see in a lot of African countries that we've seen before, which is you steal it by saying, okay, well, I'm going to offer you a military contract and you're going to give me an insane kickback. In some ways, you're stealing to hold power, and you're holding power to steal. It's a little bit of both.
And what is it doing to the millions of people in South Sudan?
It's a fairly rich country in a strange way. They have a lot of oil, they have mineral rights, they have a lot of things that there's some gold. The people aren't getting any of that money. You know, there's so much of this money that's going out of the country and not to the people who deserve it.
John, you and George have set up this organization called The Sentry. What is it?
It's a private sector attempt to follow the money, to build a team of financial forensic investigators who are burrowing into these systems of corruption that allow, in a number of countries in East and Central Africa, which is the deadliest war zone in the world, that allow literally billions of dollars to be offshored through banks into real estate and other kinds of companies and all kinds of things in the international financial system. So we took a step back and said, well, where are their vulnerabilities? The vulnerabilities are in their wallets. This is where they have externalized.
You can't shame them, but you can take their money, and that changes everything.
The international institutions that do follow money for national security issues, for terrorism and for nuclear proliferation issues and things like that, they get their hands full right now. The last thing they're going to be doing probably is chasing assets in East and Central Africa. So we set up our own team of people who do that kind of work, ex-officials from the FBI and Treasury and other kinds of entities, and we put dossiers together and hand them over to agencies, law enforcement and regulatory agencies that can actually take action against these assets.
What we're really talking about is the use of that money and the need to collect that money manifesting itself in incredible amounts of violence, rape, starvation, the tools of atrocities, and with absolutely no regard for the basic citizenry, just for themselves.
You met with President Obama today. What are you asking him and other world leaders to do?
We're not going to him and saying, surprise. This is something they deal with, every single day. They have a conversation about it.
What Clooney wants is for the U.S. and other countries to use the same tools in South Sudan they use against terrorists and rogue regimes. Sanctions, freezing the key players out of the international financial system. But you say, bottom line, war crimes shouldn't pay.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's true. And, our job is to be the advocates, right? Our job is to keep pushing and poking with a stick all of the parties that we feel, that's the UN, that's the Justice Department, that's the Treasury Department, that's the executive branch. Our job is to poke with a stick everybody we can, knowing that it's a long, slow process, but it is a process we believe we can succeed with.
So help me God.
The last time I talked with the two of you, you were pushing for independence for South Sudan from Sudan. What went wrong?
This is not a failed state, but it can be. And so our job is to continue to bring the focus. But the promise that was what we thought in 2011 came always with a caveat saying that there's a possibility for this never to work.
The thing that wasn't addressed, the missing ingredient in the international response once the South Sudan did get its independence, was a very serious effort to counter corruption. We've never in Africa used the Treasury Department's tools and the Patriot Act's tools related to anti-money laundering for issues outside of terrorism in Africa.
This is the part of the interview where I ask, why should our viewers care? Is there some larger geopolitical issue here, or is it as simple as these people need help?
The reality is that why everyone should care at home is this. A failed state leaves a vacuum, and inside a vacuum we have seen what these influences can be, and those influences can absolutely come home to roost for us, as we know, as we've seen. So the reason to do this is because we're not talking about spending a lot of money. In fact, we're doing most of the money spending right now. We're raising the money and spending it. We're just giving this to the State Department, the Justice Department, to the Treasury, people like that to follow up. What we're saying is, let's stay on this, because what we cannot let happen is this to fall apart. And in its stead, a lot of bad actors can come in, and a lot of bad things can happen from that can come to our shores.
George, I can't let this interview pass without asking you a little politics.
I figured you were going to.
You've raised millions of dollars for Hillary Clinton. You have no use for Donald Trump. I want to ask you a bigger question. What do you make of our politics today?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's frustrating. I grew up as a Democrat in Kentucky in the 70s. So, I grew up in a place, I was a minority, in that world. I didn't move to Hollywood and become a Democrat. But it wasn't as contentious, and there wasn't the idea that that once one party got power, that nothing was going to happen from the other side, that we're going to just stop things cold. I worry about that. I think that's dangerous. It's a very funny thing, odd for me to be on the same side of an issue as Bill Kristol and Charles Krauthammer and George Will and people like that. Usually we're not on the same side. I feel as if we need to get away from the divisiveness that we're stuck in right now and the fear that we're playing off of. I think it was Murrow that said we cannot be driven by fear into an age of unreason. If we look deep in our history and remember that we are not the descendants of fearful people. I think that's an important part of us, and I think that's important to remember as we go forward.
John, George, thank you. Pleasure. Always.
Thanks. Thank you. You too.